Lyra didn't know that the wounded stranger bleeding into the forest floor was the most powerful man in the kingdom. She didn't know that his enemies had left him for dead after an ambush meant to claim his throne, and she certainly didn't know that saving his life would change everything she thought she knew about her own destiny. The morning had started like every other desperate day in the past 3 months. Her brother Finn lay dying in their hidden cave, his fever burning through him like wildfire, and she needed moonbell root to break it. The rare herb only grew in the deepest parts of the Shadowmere woods, where Lord Vance's hunters roamed and where decent people feared to tread. But Lyra had stopped being decent people the day they branded her father a traitor and put a price on her family's heads. The basket on her arm felt impossibly light as she crept through the undergrowth, searching for the silvery leaves that meant the difference between watching Finn waste away or giving him another day, another week, another chance that maybe, somehow, they'd find a way to clear their family name and go home. Home. She almost laughed at the thought. Home was ashes now, burned to the ground along with everything they'd ever known. A sound made her freeze, not the natural rustling of small woodland creatures or the whisper of wind through leaves, but something heavier, something wrong. Through the trees ahead, she caught a glimpse of something that shouldn't have been there. Dark fabric, the gleam of metal, and underneath it all, the copper scent of blood, thick enough to taste. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to turn around, find another path, pretend she'd never seen anything. Finn needed her alive, not playing hero to some stranger who might already be dead. But as she crept closer, her healer's training overrode her survival instincts. The man sprawled face down in a pool of his own blood was most definitely alive, his back rising and falling in shallow, laboured breaths. And he was dying. She could see at least 3 sword wounds from where she crouched, dark stains spreading across torn leather that looked far too fine for any common soldier. This man had money, position, which meant helping him could bring exactly the kind of attention she and Finn couldn't afford. "Turn around," she whispered to herself. "Walk away. You never saw him." The stranger's hand twitched, fingers curling against the blood-soaked earth as if he was trying to push himself up. The movement was weak, desperate, and completely futile. Lyra closed her eyes and cursed her father's teachings about honour and her mother's lessons about mercy. Both dead now, but their voices still echoed in her head, telling her that some things mattered more than safety. She was going to regret this. Moving quickly now, she dropped her basket and fell to her knees beside the wounded man. Up close, the damage was worse than she'd feared. 3 deep sword wounds across his back, one dangerously close to his spine, a gash along his ribs that had soaked his shirt crimson, and something wrong with his left shoulder, twisted at an angle that made her stomach lurch. "Can you hear me?" she whispered, not daring to speak louder in case Vance's men were still nearby. No response. His face was turned away from her, dark hair matted with blood and dirt, but she could see enough to know he was young, probably not much older than her own 23 years. She pressed 2 fingers to the pulse point at his neck and nearly gasped. His heartbeat was strong, impossibly strong for someone who'd lost this much blood. And his skin was warm, almost hot, as if fever burned through him too. But it wasn't fever. It was something else entirely, something that made her fingertips tingle where they touched his skin. "You're not dying on my watch," she muttered, already calculating what she'd need to move him. The cave was nearly a mile away through dense forest, and he had to weigh twice what she did. But she'd dragged Finn's unconscious body 3 miles the night they'd fled their burning home. Desperation made people capable of impossible things. It took her the better part of an hour to get him to the cave, using a combination of leveraged dragging and sheer stubborn determination. By the time she managed to get him settled on the pile of furs that served as her makeshift medical area, she was shaking with exhaustion and her hands were sticky with his blood. Finn stirred weakly from his own nest of blankets near the cave's back wall. "Lyra? What?" "Rest," she said firmly, not looking up from her new patient. I'll explain later. She'd been caring for the sick and injured since she was old enough to hold her mother's healing supplies. She knew how to clean wounds, how to stitch torn flesh, how to brew the teas that fought infection and eased pain. But as she began cutting away the stranger's ruined clothes, she realized this was unlike anything she'd ever treated. The wounds were deep, yes, but the edges were already beginning to close. New pink skin was forming over what should have been mortal injuries, and that heat radiating from him was growing stronger, as if his body was burning through its own healing at an impossible rate. "What are you?" she breathed, staring at a cut that had definitely been worse when she'd first examined him. He didn't answer, lost somewhere in the depths of unconsciousness, but his hand found hers as she reached for her water basin. His fingers were calloused and strong, the hands of someone who knew how to fight, and the moment they touched her skin, something electric shot through her arm. She jerked back, heart pounding, but his grip tightened even in sleep, as if he didn't want to let her go. "It's all right," she found herself whispering, settling beside him again. "You're safe. I've got you." And somehow, impossibly, his breathing deepened. The tension in his shoulders eased, as if her voice alone could call him back from whatever darkness he'd been drowning in. She worked through the night, cleaning his wounds and applying the healing salves her mother had taught her to make. Every few hours she checked on Finn, whose fever seemed to have broken some time after midnight. A miracle, since she hadn't even had the chance to gather the Moonbell root yet. But it was her patient who held most of her attention. He was beautiful, she realized, as she cleaned the blood from his face. Sharp cheekbones and a strong jaw, dark lashes that swept against skin that should have been pale from blood loss, but somehow wasn't. And when she accidentally brushed her fingers against his temple, pushing sweat-dampened hair from his forehead, that strange electric sensation raced through her again. By dawn, his wounds had closed completely. Not healed exactly, but sealed over with new skin that looked weeks old rather than hours. She'd seen accelerated healing before in people with strong constitutions, but this was beyond anything natural. "Who are you?" she asked the empty air, studying his peaceful face in the grey morning light. As if in answer, his eyes opened, and Lyra's world stopped. They were amber, pure, liquid amber, like sunlight trapped in honey, and they were looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Intelligence flickered behind them, and something else. Something that made her feel as if he could see straight through to her soul. "Angel," he said, his voice rough from disuse but impossibly deep. "I thought I was dead." "You nearly were." She kept her voice steady, professional, even though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "You've been unconscious for hours. How do you feel?" He started to sit up, winced, then seemed surprised when the movement didn't bring agony. His hand went to his ribs where the deepest cut had been, finding only smooth skin beneath her careful bandaging. "Better than I should," he said slowly. "Much better. What did you do to me?" "Basic field medicine, though I have to say your body did most of the work itself." She reached for her water skin, needing something to do with her hands. "You heal remarkably fast." Those amber eyes studied her face with an attention that made her want to squirm. "You saved my life." Anyone would have done the same. "No," he said quietly, "they wouldn't have." The weight behind those words made her look at him again. There was knowledge in his expression, the kind that came from too much experience with the worst of human nature, as if he'd learned not to expect kindness from strangers. "Well," she said, suddenly shy under his intense gaze, "you're welcome, I suppose." His mouth curved into something that might have been a smile. "I suppose I am." The stranger sat up with fluid grace that should have been impossible for someone who'd nearly died hours earlier. Every movement spoke of controlled power, of muscles that knew exactly how much force they contained. Lyra found herself taking an unconscious step backward. "I should go," she said quickly, suddenly aware of how alone they were, how far from any help. "My brother needs—" "Your brother is the boy in the corner?" His amber eyes flicked toward Finn's sleeping form, and something passed over his features. Concern, perhaps, or recognition of something she couldn't see. He's been ill. It wasn't a question. Somehow this stranger could tell just by looking that Finn had been fighting for his life. His fever broke during the night, she said carefully. He should be fine now. Should be. The stranger rose to his feet in one smooth motion, and Lyra's breath caught. He was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with shoulders that seemed to fill the cave. But it wasn't his size that made her pulse race. It was the way he moved, like a predator who was very sure of his place at the top of the food chain. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. "Lyra." The answer slipped out before she could think better of it. She never gave her real name to strangers, never. But something about those amber eyes made lies feel impossible. "Lyra," he repeated, and her name sounded different in his mouth, precious somehow. "I'm Kieran. Just Kieran. No family name, no title, no indication of where he'd come from or why assassins might want him dead. But the way he said it, with quiet confidence, made her think it was a name that mattered, a name that carried weight. "You're not from around here," she observed. His mouth quirked up at one corner. "What gave me away?" "Your clothes, for one thing." She gestured at the torn leather and fine cloth she'd cut away from his wounds. "That's not merchant wear, and it's definitely not farmer's garb. And your accent, you sound like—" She trailed off, not wanting to voice what she was thinking. Like what? Like nobility. The words came out smaller than she'd intended. Like someone who's used to being obeyed. Kieran went very still. "Does that frighten you?" The honest answer was yes. Nobility meant connections to Lord Vance's court, meant questions about why she was hiding in caves instead of living in a proper home. It meant danger for her and Finn. But looking at him now, studying the way he held himself carefully distant, as if he expected her to recoil, she found herself shaking her head. "No," she said, and was surprised to realize it was true. "It should, but you don't feel dangerous, not to me." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or relief. "You said assassins did this to you," she continued. "Are they likely to come back?" "No." The single word carried absolute certainty. "They think I'm dead, and for now that's safer for everyone." "Including me?" He was quiet for a long moment, those amber eyes studying her face as if he could read secrets written there. "Especially you," he said finally. "Helping me put you at risk, Lyra. I'm sorry for that." "I chose to help you." "Because you're kind, because you couldn't walk away from someone who was suffering." He moved closer, and she caught a scent like pine forests and winter storms. But kindness can be dangerous when it's directed at the wrong people. "Are you the wrong people?" Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. "I'm trying not to be." The cryptic answer should have worried her. Instead, it made something in her chest tighten with unexpected sympathy. He sounded like a man who carried too much weight on his shoulders, like someone who'd had to make impossible choices. "Your brother," he said, changing the subject abruptly. "The fever you mentioned, how long has he been sick?" 3 weeks. The admission slipped out before she could stop it. "Maybe longer. It's hard to tell when." She caught herself before she could say too much. "When you're living rough," Kieran finished quietly, running from something. Her silence was answer enough. "May I see him?" he asked, and the request was so gentle that she found herself nodding before she'd thought it through. Kieran approached Finn's makeshift bed with the same careful grace he'd shown since waking. But as he knelt beside her brother's sleeping form, something changed. The air in the cave seemed to shimmer, and a warm golden light emanated from his hands as he placed them just above Finn's forehead. Lyra's breath caught. "What are you doing?" "Checking his health." Kieran's voice was distant, focused. "He's been poisoned." "Poisoned?" The word came out as a whisper. "That's impossible. He's just been—" "Slow acting, something designed to look like wasting sickness." The golden light pulsed brighter, and Finn's breathing deepened. Colour began returning to his pale cheeks. Someone wanted him dead, but wanted it to look natural. Horror washed over her. Lord Vance? Kieran's hands stilled. Vance? Marcus Vance? The sharpness in his voice made her look at him more closely. You know him? I know of him. Something dangerous flickered behind those amber eyes. He's the one you're running from. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. He had my father executed for treason, burned our home, put a price on our heads. What was the supposed treason? Father discovered irregularities in the tax records. Vance was skimming from the Crown's portion, planning something. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Father tried to report it through proper channels. Vance accused him of doctoring the records himself. Kieran went very, very still. The Crown's portion. Yes, Father was the royal treasurer for our province. He took his oath seriously. Tears pricked at her eyes. It got him killed. And Vance has been hunting you since then. 3 months now. We've been moving constantly, but Finn got sick and we had to stop. She looked down at her brother, who was breathing easier than he had in weeks. What did you do to him? Broke the poison's hold, drew it out of his system. Kieran's hands finally stilled, the golden light fading. He'll need rest, but he should recover fully. How? The question burst out of her. How did you do that? That light, the way you just knew what was wrong with him. That's not normal healing. Kieran rocked back on his heels, studying her with an expression she couldn't read. No, he said quietly. It's not. So what are you? The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Finally, Kieran spoke, his voice careful and measured. I'm someone who has certain abilities, someone whose enemies would use those abilities to justify terrible things if they knew I'd survived. He met her eyes directly. Someone who owes you a debt that can never be repaid. I don't want repayment. I know. His voice softened. That's what makes you extraordinary. The word hung in the air between them, and Lyra felt her cheeks flush. I'm not extraordinary. I'm just a healer doing what healers do. You saved the life of a stranger who could have brought nothing but danger to your door. You asked for nothing in return. You've been keeping your poison brother alive through skill and sheer determination while running for your lives. Kieran's amber eyes held hers steadily. That's not just extraordinary, Lyra. That's miraculous. Something was happening, something she didn't understand but could feel in the space between them, like electricity before a storm. The way he said her name, the way his presence seemed to fill every corner of the cave, the strange pull she felt toward him, despite every rational thought screaming at her to be careful. "Who are you, really?" she whispered. Kieran was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. Someone who has been looking for you his entire life without knowing it. The words sent a shiver down her spine. Not fear, exactly, but recognition of something vast and important shifting in her world. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. He stood slowly, putting careful distance between them. I need you to trust me, Lyra. Can you do that? Every survival instinct she'd developed over the past 3 months told her to say no, to demand real answers, to protect herself and Finn from whatever this stranger represented. But looking into those amber eyes, feeling the warmth that seemed to radiate from him like sunlight, she found herself nodding. For now, she said, but I'll want those answers eventually. Eventually, he agreed, when it's safe to give them. Behind them, Finn stirred and opened his eyes for the first time in days, his gaze clear and alert. Lyra, I feel better. She turned to her brother with tears streaming down her face, missing the way Kieran's expression shifted, missing the mixture of hope and terror that crossed his features as he watched her joy, missing the moment when he whispered, too quietly for her to hear, "My mate." 3 days passed in a strange sort of peace that Lyra hadn't experienced since before her world fell apart. Finn was not only conscious, but sitting up, eating the simple meals she prepared, and asking questions about their mysterious guest with the kind of curiosity that meant his mind was sharp again. Kieran, meanwhile, had settled into their small sanctuary as if he belonged there. He helped gather firewood without being asked, somehow finding dry timber even after the previous night's rain. He shared the work of preparing meals with hands that moved with surprising skill for someone who clearly came from privilege. And he watched over them both with a protective attention that should have felt intrusive, but instead made Lyra feel safer than she had in months. It was dangerous, this growing sense of security. She knew better than to trust it. But when Kieran smiled at something Finn said, or when his amber eyes found hers across the firelight in the evenings, she found herself forgetting all the reasons why she should be afraid. "Tell me about your family," she said on the third evening, as they sat beside the fire while Finn slept peacefully nearby. It was the first personal question she'd dared to ask. Kieran went still, his hands freezing in their task of sharpening a hunting knife he'd produced from somewhere. "What do you want to know?" "Anything, everything." She pulled her knees up to her chest, studying his profile in the firelight. "You know about Finn and me, about what we're running from, but I know nothing about you except that you heal impossibly fast and you can somehow draw poison from people with golden light. And that I have enemies who want me dead." "That too." She hesitated, then forged ahead. "Are you married?" The question seemed to surprise him. His eyes found hers, something unreadable flickering in their depths. "No." "Engaged? Promised to someone?" "No." His voice was softer now, almost careful. "There's no one waiting for me." The relief that flooded through her was entirely inappropriate and completely undeniable. "Oh. Why do you ask?" "Because the way you look at me makes my heart race. Because when you smile I forget to breathe. Because I'm starting to care about you in ways that terrify me." "Just curious," she said instead. Kieran set down the knife and turned to face her fully. "My family is complicated." "Complicated how?" "I have responsibilities I didn't choose, expectations I've never been able to meet." His voice was quiet, but she could hear old pain underneath it. "People depend on me for things I'm not sure I'm capable of giving." "What kind of things?" "Leadership, wisdom, strength." He laughed, but there was no humour in it. "The ability to make decisions that affect thousands of lives and somehow still sleep at night." The weight in his voice made her chest tight. "That sounds lonely." "It is." The admission seemed to surprise him. "I've been surrounded by people my entire life, but most of them see only what they need me to be, not who I am." "And who are you?" Kieran was quiet for so long, she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm someone who's spent his whole life learning to fight, to lead, to sacrifice everything for duty, but I've never learned how to just be, how to exist without the weight of other people's expectations." He looked at her, and something vulnerable flickered in his amber eyes. "Until now." "What's different now?" "You." The word hung in the air between them like a confession. "You see me as just a man, not a title, not a responsibility, just me." Lyra's breath caught. "I don't even know what your title is." "And it doesn't matter to you. That's what makes you extraordinary." There was that word again. Extraordinary. The way he said it made her feel as if she was something precious, something worth protecting. It was a feeling she'd almost forgotten existed. "Tell me about your parents," she said, needing to steer the conversation away from the intensity building between them. Kieran's expression darkened. "My father died when I was 12, assassinated by enemies of the crown." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate. "That must have been terrible." "It was the day my childhood ended." His hands clenched into fists. I went from being a boy who wanted to train with swords and climb trees to being responsible for things no child should have to understand. And your mother? She tried to protect me from it for as long as she could, but eventually duty demanded more than she could shield me from. There was old grief in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. She died 3 years ago, a wasting sickness that no healer could cure. Lyra's heart clenched. You watched her die. I held her hand as she slipped away. She made me promise to find someone who would love me for who I am, not what I represent. His eyes found hers across the firelight. I never thought I'd be able to keep that promise. The words sent heat spiraling through her chest. Kieran, I know it's too soon. I know you barely know me. He leaned forward slightly, his voice urgent. But when I'm with you, I feel like the man I was supposed to be before everything went wrong. You make me remember what it's like to hope for something beyond duty and responsibility. She should tell him to stop, should remind him that they were strangers thrown together by circumstances, that whatever he thought he felt couldn't be real. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. What do you hope for? A home that isn't a fortress, someone to share breakfast with who doesn't want anything from me except my company. His voice dropped to a whisper. Someone who looks at me the way you do. How do I look at you? Like I'm worth saving? The words broke something open in her chest. You are worth saving. Am I? There was such raw uncertainty in his voice that she couldn't stop herself from reaching out to touch his face. The moment her palm made contact with his cheek, electricity shot through both of them. Kieran's eyes widened, and she felt something snap into place between them, like a cord suddenly pulled taut. What was that? She breathed. I don't know. But his hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his skin. I felt it too. They stared at each other across the small space between them, both breathing hard. The air seemed to shimmer with possibility, with the sense that they stood on the edge of something that would change everything. Lyra, Kieran said, his voice rough, I need to tell you something. The seriousness in his tone made her stomach clench. What? I haven't been entirely honest with you. Fear spiked through her, but she didn't pull her hand away. About what? About who I am. About why those men tried to kill me. He closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering courage. About what it means that I found you. Then tell me. If I do, everything changes. You'll see me differently. You might be afraid of me. I'm already afraid of you, she admitted, but not because I think you'll hurt me. Then why? Because you make me feel things I've never felt before. Because when you look at me, I forget all the reasons why I should keep running. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Because I'm starting to care about you, and caring about people is dangerous when you're living the life I'm living. Something fierce and tender blazed in his amber eyes. What if I told you that you don't have to keep living that life? I'd say you don't understand what we're up against. And I'd say you don't understand what I'm capable of protecting. The certainty in his voice made her shiver. Kieran, who are you really? He was quiet for a moment, studying her face in the firelight. Then, slowly, he began to speak. My name is Kieran Thorne. I am 31 years old, and I have never met anyone who made me believe in the possibility of happiness until I opened my eyes 3 days ago and saw an angel tending my wounds. His thumb traced across her knuckles. I travel alone because I have trust issues stemming from too many people wanting to use me for my position. I was attacked because there are those who want to claim what's mine and see me as an obstacle to their ambition. What position? I rule the largest kingdom on this continent. I command armies, make treaties, and hold the power of life and death over millions of people. His voice was steady, matter of fact. I am the Alpha King, Lyra, and you are my mate. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Lyra stared at him, trying to process words that couldn't possibly mean what they sounded like they meant. That's not possible, she whispered. The bond between us says otherwise. His hand tightened over hers. Haven't you felt it? The pull between us, the way touching you feels like coming home, the way my presence affects you. She had felt it. From the moment she touched his pulse point in the forest, from the electric sensation every time their skin made contact, from the way her body seemed to recognize his in ways that defied explanation. "You're the Alpha King," she repeated numbly. "Yes. And you think I'm your mate?" "Yes." His eyes searched hers desperately. "I know how it sounds. I know it seems impossible. But the bond doesn't lie, Lyra. What we feel between us, that's real." She pulled her hand away from his face, needing space to think. "This is insane." "I know. You're royalty. I'm a fugitive whose father was executed for treason." "Your father was a hero who died trying to expose corruption, and your bloodline doesn't matter to the mate bond. Lord Vance will never stop hunting us. Lord Vance will never touch you again." The quiet menace in Kieran's voice made her look at him sharply. "I promise you that." She stood up abruptly, pacing to the mouth of the cave. "I need air." Kieran rose as well, but didn't follow her. "Lyra, you're asking me to believe that the most powerful man in the kingdom just happened to be bleeding to death in the exact spot where I was desperate enough to risk gathering herbs. I don't think it was a coincidence. What do you think it was?" "Fate." The word was quiet but certain. "The universe putting you exactly where you needed to be to save the one person who could save you in return." She turned to face him, studying his expression in the firelight. He looked nervous, hopeful, and utterly sincere. "If you're really the Alpha King," she said slowly, "prove it." Without hesitation, Kieran straightened to his full height. The change was immediate and dramatic. Power seemed to radiate from him like heat, filling the cave with an authority that made the air itself feel heavier. His amber eyes flashed with gold fire, and when he spoke, his voice carried the absolute certainty of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Kneel." The command hit her like a physical force. Every instinct screamed at her to drop to her knees, to submit to the power rolling off him in waves. But somehow, impossibly, she remained standing. Kieran's eyes widened in shock. "You're not kneeling." "Should I be?" "Everyone kneels." His voice was full of wonder. "Everyone. The compulsion is too strong to resist." "Maybe your magic doesn't work on me." "Or maybe," he said, his expression shifting to something like awe, "you really are my mate, because a true mate is the only person who can resist an alpha's compulsion." Lyra stared at him as the implication sank in. If he was telling the truth about who he was, if the bond between them was real, then everything she thought she knew about her life was wrong. "This is too much," she said finally. "I know." Kieran's power receded, leaving him looking like the gentle man who'd been sharing her fire for 3 days. "I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid you'd run." "I want to run now." "But you're not going to." It wasn't a question. Lyra looked at him. This man who claimed to be a king, who looked at her like she was something precious beyond measure, and realized he was right. "No," she said quietly. "I'm not going to run." "Why?" Because despite everything logical and rational screaming at her to flee, some deeper part of her recognized him, trusted him, needed him. "Because you're right," she whispered. "I can feel it too, this thing between us, and I don't think I can walk away from it." The relief that crossed Kieran's features was so profound it took her breath away. "Thank you." "For what?" "For not running, for trusting me, for being brave enough to believe in something impossible." "I haven't agreed to anything yet." "I know." He stepped closer, hope shining in his amber eyes. "But you haven't said no either." "No, I haven't." She looked at him standing there in the firelight, powerful and vulnerable and impossibly beautiful. "What happens now?" "Now we figure out how to keep you and Finn safe while we explore what this bond means." "And Lord Vance?" Kieran's expression went cold and deadly. "Leave Lord Vance to me." Lyra woke to the sound of hoofbeats thundering through the forest, still distant but growing closer. Many horses, moving fast and with purpose. Beside her, Kieran was already awake, every muscle in his body tense as he listened to the approaching riders. In the pale dawn light filtering through the cave entrance, she could see the transformation happening again. The gentle man who'd shared his deepest fears with her disappearing beneath the lethal authority of the Alpha King. "How many?" she whispered. 20, maybe more. His voice was grimly calm. "They're not bothering to mask their approach. Because they think you're dead. Or because they don't care if I hear them coming." Golden light began to gather around his hands, and she felt the mate bond pulse between them like a living thing. "Get Finn ready to move, now." But even as she turned toward her brother, Lyra knew they were too late. The hoofbeats were too close, and Finn was still weak from his ordeal. They'd never outrun mounted riders through dense forest. "There's nowhere to go," she said, ice forming in her stomach. "The cave backs up against solid rock, and they're between us and any other escape route." Kieran's jaw tightened. "Then we make our stand here." "We?" She stared at him. "Kieran, you're still recovering. You can't fight 20 men alone." "I'm not alone." His amber eyes found hers, blazing with fierce determination. "And I'm not the man I was 3 days ago. That poison they used, it's been suppressing my abilities for weeks, now that it's out of my system." The temperature in the cave suddenly spiked, and power rolled off him in waves that made the air itself tremble. Lyra gasped as she felt the full force of what he was, what he'd been holding back since the moment he'd awakened. "Stay behind me," he commanded, his voice carrying the absolute authority of an alpha who'd never learned to accept defeat. "No matter what happens, do not try to help me fight. Kieran, promise me." He caught her shoulders, his grip urgent. "Promise me you'll protect Finn and let me protect you." The sound of hoofbeats was close enough now that she could hear individual horses snorting and the jingle of harnesses. In moments they'd be discovered. "I promise," she whispered. Kieran's expression softened for just an instant, and he pressed a quick, fierce kiss to her forehead. "Stay alive, Lyra. Whatever happens next, stay alive." Then he was moving toward the cave entrance with fluid, deadly grace. The riders burst into the clearing just as Kieran stepped into the morning sunlight. 20 mounted men in Lord Vance's colours, led by a familiar figure that made Lyra's blood freeze. Marcus Vance himself sat astride a black destrier, his cruel face twisted with triumph as he spotted their hiding place. He was everything she remembered, tall, sharp-featured, with cold grey eyes that looked at people like they were objects to be used or discarded. The man who'd ordered her father's execution, who'd burned their home, who'd turned her family into fugitives. "Well, well," Vance called out, his voice carrying easily across the clearing. "If it isn't the infamous healer and her patient, I must admit I'm impressed you managed to keep him alive this long." Kieran stood perfectly still in the cave mouth, but Lyra could feel the deadly energy coiled in every line of his body. "Vance?" "Your Majesty." The title dripped with mockery. "Though I suppose that won't be accurate much longer." "You seem confident for a man who failed to kill me once already." Vance's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, I didn't fail. I simply delayed the inevitable while I gathered enough witnesses to make this official." It was then that Lyra noticed the other men, not just soldiers, but nobles she recognised from her father's time at court. Men who'd stood silent while Vance destroyed her family, who'd watched her father die without lifting a finger to help. "Witnesses to what?" Kieran asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. "Your death, of course, and your subsequent replacement." Vance gestured grandly. "You see, I've discovered evidence of your collaboration with known traitors. Very damning evidence, I'm afraid." "Let me guess. The same kind of evidence you manufactured against Lyra's father." "Evidence is evidence, Your Majesty. Who's to say how it was obtained?" Vance's eyes shifted to the cave entrance, searching for her. Speaking of the traitor's daughter, I believe she has something that belongs to me. She belongs to no one but herself. How romantic, but I'm afraid the law disagrees. Vance pulled a scroll from his coat. I have a royal warrant for her arrest, signed by certain members of your council who've grown concerned about your judgment lately. Lyra's heart sank. If Vance had managed to corrupt members of Kieran's own council, then this wasn't just about revenge. It was a coup. Those warrants are worthless, Kieran said, but she could hear the strain in his voice. I am the Alpha King. My word supersedes any council decree. Not if you're dead, it doesn't. Vance raised his hand, and his soldiers began to spread out, encircling the cave. And not if you've been declared unfit to rule due to your association with enemies of the crown. What do you want, Vance? What I've always wanted. The throne. The power to reshape this kingdom the way it should be reshaped. His voice hardened. Without weak-minded kings who show mercy to traitors and make policy based on sentiment rather than strength. And you think killing me will accomplish that? I know it will. You see, Your Majesty, I've spent months preparing for this moment. Your loyal guards have been reassigned. Your strongest allies have been given missions that will keep them far from the capital for weeks. And your precious council has been convinced that you've become dangerously unstable. Lyra felt sick. This wasn't a random encounter or even a simple assassination attempt. This was a carefully planned overthrow that Vance had been orchestrating for months. All for power, Kieran said, and she could hear the disgust in his voice. All for order. Vance's eyes glittered with fanatic fervour. You've grown soft, Kieran. You make treaties when you should make war. You show mercy when you should show strength. The kingdom needs a ruler who understands that power is meant to be used, not squandered on idealistic nonsense. The kingdom needs a ruler who protects its people, not one who crushes them. We'll have to agree to disagree on that point. Vance raised his sword, and his men followed suit. But don't worry, your death will be quick and honourable. It's more than you deserve, really, considering your recent choices in companionship. The insult toward her made something snap inside Kieran. The air around him began to shimmer with golden energy, and when he spoke, his voice carried the full force of his alpha power. You will not speak of my mate with anything but respect. Several of the horses reared as the power hit them, and even the nobles behind Vance looked suddenly uncertain. But Vance himself seemed unaffected, his smile widening. Your mate? He laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. You've claimed the traitor's daughter. Oh, this is even better than I hoped. The council will be thrilled to learn that their king has been so thoroughly compromised. The only one who's compromised here is you. Am I? Tell me, Your Majesty, how many of my men do you think you can kill before one of them puts an arrow through your heart, or better yet, through hers? He gestured toward the cave. I wonder how your famous alpha healing works when your mate is bleeding out in your arms. Lyra saw Kieran's hands clench into fists, saw the way his power flared brighter with barely controlled rage. But she also saw something else. Calculation. He was outnumbered, still not at full strength, and unable to protect both her and Finn if the fighting became general. It was then that she made a decision that would have horrified him if he'd known what she was thinking. She stepped out of the cave. Enough! She called out, her voice carrying clearly across the clearing. Lord Vance, you want me? I'm here. Lyra, no! Kieran spun toward her, his face a mask of terror and fury. Get back inside! I won't hide while you face this alone. She walked steadily toward him, ignoring the way Vance's men tracked her movement with their weapons. We're in this together. You promised. I promised to protect Finn and stay alive. I'm doing both. She stopped beside him, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin. But I won't let you sacrifice yourself to save us. Vance watched their exchange with obvious amusement. How touching! The traitor's daughter thinks she can save her king through the power of love. No, Lyra said, meeting his cold gaze directly. "I think I can save him by giving you what you really want." "Which is?" "Me, in exchange for his life and my brother's safety." "Lyra, no," Kieran breathed, but she could feel the mate bond pulsing between them, could feel the desperate plan forming in his mind as he realized what she was doing. "An interesting offer," Vance mused, "but I'm afraid I need you both dead to make this work properly." "Do you?" She took another step forward, putting herself slightly between Kieran and the mounted soldiers. "Because it seems to me that having the king's mate as a hostage would give you considerable leverage over any remaining loyalists." "True, but then again, dead martyrs can't inconveniently escape or inspire rescue attempts." It was then that Kieran moved. The transformation was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment he was standing beside her, tense but contained. The next he was something else entirely, 6.5 feet of pure lethal grace wreathed in golden fire that made the very air burn. His first leap carried him 20 feet, straight into the centre of Vance's formation. His claws, extended to their full razor length, took down 3 men before they even realized he was among them. The clearing erupted into chaos. Horses screamed and reared as the scent of alpha power hit them. Soldiers shouted orders and tried to bring their weapons to bear on a target that moved too fast to track. And through it all, Kieran fought with a precision and brutality that left no doubt about why he was called the Alpha King. But even as she watched him tear through Vance's forces like a force of nature, Lyra could see the problem. There were too many of them, and more importantly, they were learning to work together. 2 men would engage him directly while others flanked him. Crossbow bolts flew from multiple directions, forcing him to constantly move to avoid being pinned down. And Vance himself hung back, watching with calculating eyes as his men slowly wore down her mate. It was when one of the crossbow bolts actually found its mark, punching through Kieran's left shoulder, that Lyra understood what she had to do. She ran straight toward the fight, ignoring Kieran's roar of denial as she threw herself between him and a poisoned blade aimed at his heart. The sword took her in the side, a burning line of agony that drove her to her knees. But in that moment of self-sacrifice, something extraordinary happened. The mate bond between them exploded into full manifestation. Golden light poured from both of them, so bright and powerful that it knocked every man in the clearing to his knees. Lyra felt Kieran's alpha power flowing through her, magnified and transformed by their connection, while her own healing abilities amplified his strength beyond anything either of them had possessed alone. When the light faded, Kieran stood over her fallen form, his eyes blazing with golden fire, and his presence so commanding that even the ground seemed to tremble beneath his feet. "Anyone else who wants to threaten my mate," he said, his voice carrying absolute, unshakable authority, "is welcome to try." The remaining soldiers threw down their weapons and fled. Vance, alone now except for the nobles who cowered behind him, stared at Kieran with a mixture of fear and rage. "This isn't over." "Yes," Kieran said, his voice deadly quiet. "It is." The power that rolled off him was so intense that Vance's horse bolted, carrying its rider away into the forest. The corrupted nobles followed, abandoning their coup attempt in the face of Kieran's fully manifested alpha dominance. And then Kieran was on his knees beside her, his hands glowing with healing light as he pressed them to her wound. "You magnificent, impossible woman," he whispered, his voice shaking. "Don't you ever do anything that foolish again." "Did it work?" she managed through gritted teeth. "Look around." She did, seeing the scattered weapons and the silence of the clearing. "We won. We won." His healing light pulsed stronger, and she felt the sword wound beginning to close. "Though you're going to be the death of me if you keep throwing yourself in front of blades." "Only if they're aimed at you." Kieran's laugh was half sob. "I love you, Lyra, completely, impossibly, forever." "I love you too," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "My Alpha King." Behind them, Finn emerged from the cave, staring at the scene with wide eyes. "Sister, what just happened?" "Everything changed," Kieran said, gathering Lyra into his arms. "Everything changed." 2 weeks later, Lyra stood in the centre of the royal palace's great hall, surrounded by more wealth and luxury than she'd ever imagined could exist in one place. Crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across marble floors, polished to mirror brightness. Tapestries depicting centuries of royal history lined walls that soared 3 stories above her head. And everywhere she looked, nobility dressed in silks and jewels watched her with expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. She was wearing a gown of deep sapphire blue that had been crafted by the palace's finest seamstresses in the days since Kieran had brought her and Finn to the capital. The fabric was so fine it felt like liquid silk against her skin, and the intricate beadwork caught the light with every breath she took. She should have felt beautiful, regal, worthy of standing beside the Alpha King. Instead, she felt like an imposter wearing stolen clothes. "Breathe," Kieran murmured from beside her, his hand finding hers, despite the dozen protocol masters who'd insisted that public displays of affection were inappropriate for formal court proceedings. "You belong here." Easy for him to say. He'd been born to this world of politics and ceremony, raised from childhood to command rooms full of powerful people with nothing more than his presence. She was the healer's daughter who'd been hiding in caves less than a month ago. "Lord Ashford approaches," announced the court herald, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "Earl of Westmarch and member of the High Council." Lyra's stomach clenched as she recognised the thin, sharp-faced man walking toward them. He'd been one of the nobles with Vance in the forest, one of the conspirators who'd wanted to see Kieran dead and her family destroyed. "Your Majesty," Ashford said, offering a bow that was precisely the correct depth for acknowledging a king, but somehow managed to convey reluctance. "I must say, the court is surprised by recent developments." "Are they?" Kieran's voice was mild, but Lyra could feel the alpha power thrumming just beneath his calm exterior. "And what developments would those be, Lord Ashford?" "Your sudden engagement to—" Ashford's pale eyes flicked toward Lyra with barely concealed disdain. "To the traitor's daughter." The insult hit her like a physical blow, but before she could respond, Kieran moved. He didn't raise his voice or make any threatening gestures. He simply stepped forward half a pace, and the temperature in the great hall dropped 10 degrees. "That's Queen-elect Lyra to you, Lord Ashford, and if you ever refer to her father as a traitor again, I'll consider it a personal insult requiring satisfaction." The challenge was clear and deadly serious. Ashford went pale, suddenly remembering that the man before him wasn't just a king, but an alpha who'd torn through 20 armed soldiers barely 2 weeks ago. "Of course, Your Majesty. My apologies for my poor choice of words." Apology accepted. Kieran's smile was sharp as winter frost. "This time." Ashford retreated as quickly as dignity would allow, but Lyra could see other nobles watching the exchange with calculating eyes. The message was clear. The king would tolerate no disrespect toward his chosen mate. But she could also see the resentment simmering beneath their carefully neutral expressions. "They hate me," she said quietly, as another group of courtiers approached. "They fear you," Kieran corrected. "There's a difference." "Is there?" "They fear what you represent. Change. The possibility that blood and titles matter less than character and capability." His hand squeezed hers gently. "They'll learn to respect you, or they'll learn to find other kingdoms to call home." The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions, veiled insults disguised as compliments, and political manoeuvring so subtle she almost missed it entirely. Through it all, Kieran remained at her side, his presence a steady anchor in the shifting currents of court politics. But it was when Lord Chancellor Blackwood approached that the real test began. Blackwood was a mountain of a man with silver hair and eyes like chips of winter ice. Unlike Ashford's barely concealed hostility, his opposition was calm, reasoned, and infinitely more dangerous. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing respectfully, "might I request a private word? Anything you have to say to me, you can say to my queen." "Very well." Blackwood's gaze shifted to Lyra, and she felt as if she was being dissected by a master surgeon. "My lady, while I'm sure your personal qualities are admirable, the Council has concerns about the political implications of this union." "What sort of concerns?" Lyra asked, proud that her voice remained steady. "Border tensions with the Eastern Kingdoms have escalated in recent months. Our spies report that King Valdris has been making overtures to the southern duchies, suggesting that our current leadership has grown weak and ineffective." Blackwood's expression remained diplomatically neutral. A marriage alliance with one of the established royal houses would go far towards stabilising these relationships. "You mean a marriage alliance with someone other than me?" "I mean a marriage that serves the kingdom's strategic interests rather than personal desires." The words were carefully chosen to sound reasonable, logical, even caring. But Lyra heard the real message underneath. "You're not good enough for him, and your presence weakens us all." "Lord Chancellor," Kieran said, his voice carrying the edge of genuine anger now, "are you suggesting that I should break the mate bond for political convenience? I'm suggesting that personal feelings, however strong, should not override the needs of the realm. And I'm telling you that the mate bond is not a personal feeling, it's a force of nature that makes me stronger, not weaker." Kieran stepped closer to Blackwood, and several nearby conversations stopped as people sensed the confrontation building. "Lyra doesn't just have my heart, Chancellor. She has my power, my protection, and my absolute loyalty. Anyone who threatens her threatens me directly." "And if King Valdris decides that your loyalty has compromised your judgment? If he moves against our borders while you're distracted by domestic concerns? Then he'll learn exactly how much stronger I've become since finding my mate." The quiet confidence in Kieran's voice sent a shiver through the watching nobles, but Blackwood pressed on, apparently determined to make his point. "Your Majesty, I've served this crown for 30 years. I've seen kings rise and fall, and I can tell you that the greatest threat to any ruler is the belief that love conquers all political realities." "And I can tell you," Kieran said, his eyes beginning to glow with golden light, "that the greatest threat to this particular ruler is anyone who believes they can dictate whom he loves." The power radiating from him was so intense that several of the nearest courtiers actually stepped backward. But it was Lyra who ended the confrontation by placing her hand on Kieran's arm. "Lord Chancellor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent hall, "I understand your concerns about my suitability. You're right that I have no royal blood, no political connections, no strategic value to offer the crown." Kieran started to protest, but she squeezed his arm gently. "What I do have," she continued, "is 3 months of experience keeping the most important person in this kingdom alive when powerful men wanted him dead. I have the ability to heal wounds that would cripple other rulers, and I have a mate bond that makes both of us stronger than either could be alone." She looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of every noble who dared to question her worthiness. "You want to know if I can handle the political pressures of being queen? Ask Lord Vance. Oh, wait, he fled the kingdom rather than face the consequences of threatening what's mine." Her smile was sharp as any blade. "You want to know if I can protect this realm's interests? I've already died once for this king. I'll do it again if necessary." The silence that followed her words was absolute. Then slowly one person began to clap, then another, then a dozen more, until the sound of applause echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Kieran was staring at her with an expression of pride and amazement that made her heart race. "Have I mentioned lately that you're magnificent? You might have said something along those lines." She smiled up at him, feeling the mate bond pulse warm and strong between them. "Was that too much?" "It was perfect." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles, despite the watching crowd. And it was true, every word of it. Lord Chancellor Blackwood, looking somewhat stunned by her response, managed a stiff bow. "My lady, perhaps I underestimated your qualifications for the position. Perhaps you did. Then I offer my congratulations to you both, and my apologies for any offence." "Apology accepted," Lyra said graciously. "And Lord Chancellor, when King Valdris realises that this kingdom now has both an Alpha King and his bonded mate protecting it, I suspect his interest in our borders will cool considerably." The rest of the evening passed in a very different atmosphere. Word of her confrontation with Blackwood spread through the hall like wildfire, and suddenly the hostile whispers were replaced by curious respect. Nobles who'd been sneering behind her back an hour earlier were now approaching with genuine interest in what the future queen had to say. "You realise," Kieran murmured as they finally escaped to the relative privacy of his chambers late that night, "that you just transformed yourself from political liability to political asset in the space of 5 minutes?" "Good." Lyra kicked off the delicate slippers that had been pinching her feet all evening and collapsed onto the enormous 4-poster bed. "Because I was getting tired of being polite to people who thought I didn't deserve you." "You don't deserve me," Kieran said, beginning to unlace the complex fastening of her gown. "You deserve so much better than a king with too many enemies and too much responsibility." "What I deserve," she said, turning to face him, "is a mate who makes me feel like I can take on the world and win." "And do you feel like you can take on the world?" She thought about the last few weeks, the terror of discovery, the violence of the confrontation with Vance, the overwhelming luxury of palace life, and the political manoeuvring she'd navigated tonight. "With you beside me? Yes." She reached up to cup his face in her hands. "I can take on anything." Kieran's kiss was soft and reverent, but she could feel the deeper passion burning just beneath his careful control. "Tomorrow we make it official." "Tomorrow we make it official," she agreed. "Are you ready to be stuck with me forever?" "Lyra," he said, his amber eyes blazing with love and certainty. "I've been ready since the moment you decided I was worth saving." Outside the palace walls, the kingdom slept peacefully under the protection of their Alpha King and his chosen queen. And in the royal chambers, 2 hearts beat in perfect synchronization, bound by a love that had already proven stronger than assassination, politics, and the doubts of an entire court. Tomorrow would bring the formal ceremony, the official recognition of their bond, and the beginning of their reign together. Tonight they were simply Kieran and Lyra, healer and patient, 2 souls who'd found their perfect match in the most impossible circumstances. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything. 6 months later, Queen Lyra stood at the window of the royal study, one hand resting on the gentle curve of her growing belly, while the other held a letter that had arrived that morning from the furthest reaches of the kingdom. The parchment bore the seal of a village she'd never heard of, but the words written in careful script told a story that had become wonderfully familiar. "Another one?" Kieran asked from where he sat behind the massive oak desk, reviewing trade agreements with the kind of patience that still amazed her. The man who'd once been forced to make life-and-death decisions in isolation now shared every choice with her, seeking her counsel on everything from military strategy to agricultural policy. "A request for a healing centre," she confirmed, turning to smile at him. "The village of Millbrook. They've heard about what we've accomplished in the other provinces and want to establish their own facility. That makes 37 centres in 6 months. 38 if you count the expansion at Riverside." She moved to perch on the arm of his chair, a casual intimacy that would have scandalised the court when she'd first arrived, but now felt as natural as breathing. "The letters keep coming faster than we can respond to them." Kieran set down his quill and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her closer so he could press his face against her side. Through their mate bond, she felt his wonder and contentment as clearly as her own, emotions that had grown stronger and more complex as their child grew within her. Our little one is already changing the kingdom, he murmured, his breath warm against the silk of her gown. The bond enhancement during pregnancy has increased your healing abilities beyond anything we could have predicted. It was true. The discovery that a bonded Alpha King's mate gained exponentially more power when carrying his child had shocked everyone, including the palace healers who'd been documenting the phenomenon with barely contained excitement. Lyra could now heal injuries that would have been beyond her abilities before, and her influence seemed to extend far beyond her physical presence. Villages that established healing centres based on her techniques reported success rates that bordered on miraculous. The kingdom was ready for healing, she said, running her fingers through his dark hair. I think people were just waiting for someone to show them it was possible. A soft knock at the study door interrupted them, and Kieran's personal aide entered with the careful deference that had replaced the sceptical wariness of Lyra's first weeks at court. Your Majesty's Lord Commander Garrett has arrived with his report. Kieran straightened, his expression shifting to the focused attention he reserved for matters of security. Send him in. Marcus Garrett, the grizzled veteran who commanded the Royal Guard, entered with a satisfied smile that immediately put Lyra at ease. Whatever news he brought, it was good. Your Majesty, Your Grace, he said, offering crisp bows to both of them. I'm pleased to report that Lord Vance's remaining allies have been neutralised. All of them? Kieran asked. The last holdouts surrendered yesterday morning when they learned that King Valdris had officially recognised your marriage and sent wedding gifts. Garrett's smile widened. Seems our eastern neighbour decided that maintaining friendly relations with a mated alpha pair was more valuable than any alliance Vance might have offered. Lyra felt a weight she hadn't realised she'd been carrying lift from her shoulders. For months there had been the constant underlying tension of knowing that Vance's supporters were still out there, still plotting, still representing a potential threat to everything they'd built. And Vance himself? She asked. In exile beyond our borders and apparently abandoned by everyone who once supported him. My contacts suggest he's become something of a laughingstock among the other kingdoms. The man who was so threatened by a healer that he tried to overthrow an Alpha King. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. Vance's attempt to use her supposed weakness as a weapon against Kieran had instead highlighted the strength of their bond and made him appear desperate and foolish. Thank you, Marcus, Kieran said. Please convey my gratitude to the Guard for their excellent work in tracking down these threats. It's been my pleasure, Your Majesty. If I may say so, the kingdom hasn't been this peaceful in decades. Whatever you and Her Grace are doing, it's working. After Garrett left, Lyra and Kieran sat in comfortable silence, processing the news that the last shadows of their dangerous beginning had finally been cleared away. It's really over, she said finally. This part of it is. Kieran's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the automatic ease of constant practice. Now we get to focus on the future instead of just surviving the present. What kind of future do you see? A kingdom where children grow up never knowing what it's like to fear their leaders, where healing centres are as common as market squares, where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. His amber eyes found hers, warm with love and certainty. A future where our children inherit a realm worth ruling. The mention of their children, plural, made her heart skip. They'd already confirmed through the mate bond that she carried twins, a boy and a girl who would grow up knowing both the responsibilities and the joys of their heritage. And personally, she asked, what do you want for us? Mornings like this, he said without hesitation. Quiet moments where we're just Kieran and Lyra, working together to make tomorrow better than today. Evening walks in the garden where you tell me about the letters you've received and I pretend to complain about trade negotiations when I'm actually grateful for the peace to conduct them. You want domestic tranquility. I want a life with you. His voice carried all the wonder of a man who'd never expected to find such happiness. Everything else is just details. A flutter of movement in her belly made them both smile. their children already making their presence known, already eager to be part of the world their parents were creating for them. "They're going to be extraordinary," Kieran said, his hand joining hers on the curve of her stomach. "They're going to be loved," she corrected. "Everything else they can figure out for themselves." That evening they walked through the palace gardens, as had become their custom, discussing the day's work and planning for tomorrow's challenges. The roses Kieran had planted when they'd first returned from their chaotic beginning were in full bloom now, their fragrance sweet in the warm air. "Do you remember," Lyra asked as they paused beside the fountain at the garden centre, "when you told me that finding me felt like coming home?" "I remember." "I thought you were just being poetic. I didn't understand what you meant." She turned to face him in the twilight, marvelling as she always did at the way the evening light turned his amber eyes to liquid gold. "Now I do." "And what does it mean?" "It means that home isn't a place. It's not even a person, really." She reached up to touch his face, feeling the mate bond pulse warm and strong between them. "It's the feeling of being exactly where you belong, doing exactly what you were meant to do, with exactly the right person beside you." Kieran's kiss was soft and reverent, carrying the weight of 6 months of shared joy and shared purpose. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, their breathing synchronized as always. "The cave seems like a lifetime ago," he said. "It was a lifetime ago. We're different people now." "Are we?" She considered the question seriously. "You're still the man who was willing to die protecting people he'd never met. I'm still the healer who couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. But we're also more than we were separately. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Much greater." She smiled, thinking of all the ways their bond had enhanced not just their individual abilities, but their capacity to touch other lives. And getting greater every day. From somewhere in the palace behind them came the sound of laughter, Finn most likely, entertaining the young pages with stories of their adventures. Her brother had thrived in his new role as the Queen's family, studying advanced healing techniques and serving as liaison between the palace and the growing network of healing centres. "He's happy," Kieran observed, following her gaze. "Finally, after everything he went through, he deserves to be happy." "We all do." The simple statement carried profound truth. After months of danger, uncertainty and struggle, they'd all found their way to a life none of them could have imagined. A life filled with purpose, love, and the deep satisfaction that came from building something meaningful together. "Your Majesties?" A young page approached with careful deference. "The evening council meeting is prepared to begin at your convenience." "Thank you, James. We'll be along shortly." As the page retreated, Lyra and Kieran shared a look of amused resignation. Even in their personal paradise, duty called. "Ready to go change the world some more?" he asked, offering his arm with mock formality. "With you? Always." They walked back toward the palace together, their steps perfectly matched, their hearts beating in synchronization, their minds already turning to the evening's agenda of trade disputes, healing centre proposals, and diplomatic correspondence. The work of ruling was never finished, but when shared between true partners, even the most mundane tasks became meaningful. Behind them, the roses continued to bloom in the gathering darkness, their beauty a testament to the care and attention that could transform even the most neglected ground into something spectacular, just like the kingdom itself, just like their love. In the weeks that followed, as summer turned to autumn and Lyra's pregnancy advanced, the transformation of the realm continued. Healing centres opened faster than they could be staffed, and applications poured in from healers across the neighbouring kingdoms who wanted to train in the revolutionary techniques the Queen had developed. The palace itself had changed too, becoming a place of warmth and laughter instead of cold formality. Finn's presence had brought a vitality to the halls that even the most traditional courtiers couldn't help but appreciate, and the anticipation of royal heirs had infused everyone with a sense of hopeful purpose. But perhaps the greatest change was in Kieran and Lyra themselves. The desperate urgency that had marked their early relationship had settled into something deeper and more enduring, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and absolute trust. "I have something for you," Kieran said one evening as they prepared for bed, producing a small wooden box from his coat pocket. "Another gift? You spoil me." "This one's different." His expression was suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't seen since their early days together. "It's not new. It belonged to my mother." Lyra opened the box to find a delicate silver pendant shaped like intertwined leaves, simple but exquisite. "It's beautiful." She wore it every day, said it reminded her that even the strongest trees need their roots intertwined with another's to weather the storms. He took the necklace from the box, moving behind her to fasten it around her neck. "I want our children to know that some traditions are worth keeping." The pendant settled against her skin like it had always belonged there, warm and comfortable and somehow familiar. "I love it, and I love the tradition behind it." "Good." His arms came around her from behind, his hands resting on her belly where their children grew. "Because I want them to know that their parents' love story didn't start with politics or duty. It started with one person willing to save another, and everything that followed grew from that moment of pure choice. The moment you decided I was worth the risk." "The moment you decided I was worth saving," he corrected. "Everything else was just details." They stood together in the firelight, surrounded by the quiet luxury of their chambers, feeling the gentle movements of their unborn children and the steady pulse of the bond that connected them to each other and to the kingdom they served. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities to heal and protect and build. But tonight they were simply two people who'd found their perfect match against all odds, preparing to welcome the next generation of their impossible love story. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything they'd never dared to dream, and everything they'd always needed without knowing it. It was home.